Hi, welcome to this tutorial for beginners who want to create synthwave or 80s electronica style music. What I've done is I've recorded a small piece which I'll play back to you, and after you listen to it, we'll sort of break it down and discuss it, and I'll go through the arrangement and choice of sounds and harmony and so on. Okay, I'd like to start with the arrangement, and this piece has just 4 separate tracks, 3 synth tracks and 1 drum track, and they come in one after the other, starting with a pad, then continuing with the bass, continuing with a rhythmic element, and finally adding the drums. And really, when you create a synthwave track, sort of the beginner approach would be to have one of each of these elements in your track. You need some sort of pad sound that will, well, as its name implies, pad the background. It will play the harmonies. Then you need a bass sound, which will, give the lower end and also help define the harmony. Then you need some sort of motion sound, something that will add rhythmic complexity to what you're hearing. And finally, you need drums. Once you have these 4 elements, you really have pretty much everything you need for a successful synthwave track. And you can introduce them and remove them throughout the song to add interest, to maybe build up things, build down, and control the tension. Now let's take a closer look at each of the elements, and let's start with the pad. The chords the pad plays are in the key of A minor, and they are F, G, A minor, C, and then D minor, C over a bass of E, and F major. So this progression repeats basically 4 times throughout this piece. Let me play the pad sound individually for you and also show you on the bottom of the screen exactly which keys I played, so the voicing of the chords I played. And as I play it out, I'll also add some notes for you to pay attention to on the screen. The next element we'll look at is the bass. So the bass is very simple. It's a repeating bass. It just plays the bass note of each chord. So if you're hearing a G major chord, it just plays G over and over again with 16th notes. There are more complex bass patterns, of course, but remember, this is a beginner tutorial. I don't want to make things too complicated, and I hope that you'll agree with me when I say that even though this is a simple pattern, it still sounds good. So if you choose the right bass, you'll get a fairly pleasing track. Let me play the bass part to you separately and also show you again which keys I played on the keyboard so you can follow along. Next, let's look at the rhythmic element. So it sounds a little bit like an arpeggio, but I actually played each of the notes individually. The rhythmic element adds motion and complexity, and there are a couple of things I'd like to point out. First of all, the rhythmic element doesn't immediately come in, but it fades in at the beginning. The second thing is that as it plays, I actually change I play with the modulation wheel. The modulation wheel controls the filter cutoff, and I change this filter cutoff as the rhythmic element plays out. And this adds interest. Now, let's take a closer look at the exact notes I play for the rhythmic element, and I'll write a few comments for you to pay attention to on top of the screen as I play it. Finally, the drum pattern is fairly basic. It's an alternating bass and snare with a hi-hat to add some rhythmic interest. Some songs have a hi-hat, some don't. It's kind of a matter of taste. So just try each option and just decide for yourself if you need or don't need a hi-hat. Let's have a quick listen to the drums in isolation, just so you can hear how they sound. The last part I'd like to point out is choice of sounds. People think that you need a lot of VSTs or virtual instruments to create a very, very lush track. And in this particular example, I only used two. For the synth sounds, I used Hive, which is actually my favorite synth. And for the drums, I used Addictive Drums. And they have an electronic kit, and that's basically it. That's all I used. Now, there is of course a great deal of importance to choosing the right sounds, or actually the sounds that sound most pleasing to you, but you really have to remember that what you're looking for is a bass sound, a pad sound, a rhythmic element, and they have to be fairly distinct from each other so that they sort of occupy or draw the listener's attention in different ways. The point I'm trying to make is that once you have these three elements, you can switch out the sounds and still get a fairly good sounding track. And just to prove this to you, let me play back the same track but using completely different sounds. Again, you're still going to have a pad, a bass, and a rhythmic element playing the exact same notes, but I'm just going to switch up the sounds. Here's how it's going to sound. I hope this short tutorial has been interesting and educational for you. We went through a couple of things. First of all, how the track was built, that is the arrangement, and what was the reasoning behind choosing this particular arrangement. Then we went through the actual notes that were played, the harmony, the chord progression, and the notes. And I actually highly suggest that you try to replicate this. Just play out the same notes, for example, of the pad on your own keyboard. And finally, I quickly went over the sounds, and I guess the main thing I wanted to stress is that you don't need a lot of VSTs, a lot of synths. You just need like one or two good ones that you're happy with, that you like how they sound, maybe complement each other, and that's really it. Don't try to overcomplicate things. Just find 1, 2, top 3 synths that you're happy with and stick to them, learn them in and out, and kind of understand where each sound is, go through the presets, program your own presets, and that's it. Of course, don't forget to have fun. I hope you learned something interesting, and I'll see you next time.